The stars seemed closer tonight. Captain Rain Solace stood at the viewport of the abandoned observation station, his weathered face illuminated by the distant glow of a purple nebula. His fingers traced the outline of the broken silver star badge that hung suspended in a small anti-gravity field on his desk, a constant reminder of what he once was and what he had lost. 17 years of service to the Galactic Alliance, 3 medals of valor, and in the end, all it took was one accusation of treason to strip it all away. The observation station, Outpost Eridani 9, floated at the edge of charted space, a forgotten relic from the last Great War, much like himself. The Alliance had no use for heroes, once peace treaties were signed. Even less use for those who questioned the methods by which that peace was maintained. Rain's comm unit beeped, a rare intrusion into his self-imposed exile. The holographic interface flickered to life, revealing the stern face of Alliance envoy Tellus. "Captain Solace," Tellus said, his voice echoing in the empty control room. "The Council sends its regards." "I'm sure they do," Rain replied, not bothering to mask his contempt. "What do they want this time?" "This is your 13th diplomatic marriage proposal, Captain. The Council wishes to remind you that continued refusal is inadvisable." Rain turned away from the viewport, his eyes falling on the broken star badge. 12 princesses, ambassadors, and dignitaries. 12 attempts to turn me into a political pawn. My answer remains the same. Tellus's expression hardened. "This isn't a request, Captain. The peace between systems is maintained through these unions. Your continued defiance has been noted in the Black Peace Register." "The what?" "Those deemed obstacles to galactic harmony." Tellus's voice dropped. "The Zarketh Empire has taken special interest in your case. They're sending their final offer." "Another princess?" Rain scoffed. "No," Tellus said, his image beginning to fade. "They're sending the one who kills princesses." The transmission cut off, leaving Rain alone with the stars and the broken badge that seemed to mock him from its anti-gravity field. "Liray," he called out, "run a security scan on the station." The ancient AI of the observation post hummed to life, her holographic form materializing beside him, a blue-tinged silhouette of what might have once been programmed to look human. "Security protocols engaged, Captain. May I inquire about the nature of your concern?" "We're having a visitor," Rain said, moving toward his quarters. "From the Zarketh Empire." "The Zarketh Empire," Liray repeated, her holographic form flickering slightly. "Records indicate they specialize in bioengineered war assets. Shall I prepare defensive countermeasures?" Rain paused at the door to his quarters. "No. Let's see what kind of monster they've sent to tame me first." 3 days later, the sleek, obsidian ship of the Zarketh Empire docked at the station. Rain watched from the control room as the airlock cycled. He had chosen not to wear a uniform. He had burned those years ago. Instead, he stood in simple gray clothing, the broken star badge his only adornment, pinned to his chest as a statement. The airlock hissed open, and she stepped through. Varel Ka moved with the fluid grace of a predator, tall and imposing. Her skin was the pale blue characteristic of the Zarketh, but marked with intricate patterns that Rain recognized as military designations. Her hair, white as starlight, was pulled back in a severe style that accentuated the sharp angles of her face. But it was her eyes that held his attention, violet and empty, devoid of emotion or warmth. She was beautiful in the way that plasma weapons were beautiful, deadly, efficient, and designed for a single purpose. "Captain Rain Solace," she said, her voice surprisingly melodic, for someone rumored to have ended the lives of at least 3 royal bloodlines. "I am Varel Ka, emissary of the Zarketh Empire." "You're a long way from the imperial courts," Rain replied, keeping his distance. I'm afraid I don't have any princesses for you to assassinate here. A flicker of something, perhaps surprise, crossed her face before the mask of indifference returned. You are well informed. When someone sends their most notorious assassin under the guise of a marriage proposal, it pays to be informed. Varel stepped further into the control room, her gaze sweeping the station with clinical precision. I am not here under false pretenses. Captain, the Zarketh Empire has indeed sent me as a potential bride. Rain laughed, a harsh sound in the quiet station. And if I refuse? Then, according to ancient Zarketh law, I am to eliminate the obstacle to peace. Her eyes met his, unflinching. You? Of course, Rain said, the bitterness evident in his voice. Peace through forced matrimony or death. How very diplomatic. The law also requires that I reside with you for 3 days before carrying out my mission. Varel's tone was matter-of-fact, as if discussing the weather rather than his potential execution. A tradition dating back to when my people believed that knowing one's enemy brought honor to their death. Rain gestured around the sparse station. Make yourself at home, then, though I warn you, the accommodations aren't exactly imperial standard. Varel inclined her head slightly. I require little comfort. I was engineered for efficiency, not luxury. Engineered, Rain repeated, studying her more carefully. You're one of their war genes. I am a national asset of the Zarketh Empire, she corrected, her voice flat. The culmination of generations of genetic enhancement designed to serve the imperial will. And does the imperial will usually involve forcing marriage on unwilling parties? The imperial will involves maintaining peace across the galaxy, Varel replied. Your refusal of 12 diplomatic unions has been deemed disruptive to that peace. Rain turned away, moving to the viewport. Peace built on the sacrifice of individual freedom is no peace at all. It's just a prettier form of tyranny. Freedom is a luxury in times of potential conflict, Varel said, following him to the viewport. The marriage unions prevent war between systems. They have for centuries. They prevent war by creating prisoners, Rain countered. Those princesses and diplomats, shipped off to strange worlds. Strange beds. They're just hostages with pretty titles. Varel's reflection in the viewport glass showed no reaction. You speak as if you know their minds. I know enough. Rain's hand unconsciously moved to the broken star on his chest. I've seen the aftermath when these political marriages fail. I've cleaned up the diplomatic messes with blood and fire, and I've watched good soldiers die for causes they didn't understand. A silence fell between them, filled only by the quiet hum of the station's life support systems. Your quarters are through there, Rain finally said, pointing to a corridor. 3 days. Then you can either leave with my refusal, or try to kill me. Either way, this station will still be my home, or my grave. Varel nodded once, then moved with silent efficiency toward the designated corridor. At the threshold, she paused, looking back at him with those empty violet eyes. Captain Solace, she said, I have never failed a mission. Rain met her gaze steadily. Neither had I, until the Alliance decided I was more valuable as a scapegoat than a soldier. Something unreadable flickered across her face before she disappeared down the corridor, leaving Rain alone with the stars and his broken badge. The first day passed in tense silence. Rain maintained his routine, monitoring the station systems, cataloging stellar phenomena, and training in the small gymnasium he had converted from a storage bay. Varel observed him from a distance, her violet eyes tracking his movements with predatory focus. They shared a meal in silence, the station's synthesized food as bland as the conversation. Rain noticed that Varel ate with mechanical precision, consuming exactly what her body needed, no more, no less. On the second day, Rain found Varel in the control room, examining the broken star badge in its anti-gravity field. "That's private," he said, stepping quickly into the room. Varel turned, unperturbed by his sudden appearance. "It's displayed openly." As a reminder, Rain moved to the console, deliberately placing himself between her and the badge. "Of what?" she asked, her head tilting slightly in what might have been curiosity. Rain hesitated, then answered, "Of promises broken, of loyalty betrayed." "Why keep it if it represents such negative memories? Why not destroy it completely?" "It's broken," Rain said after a moment. "But it's still a star." Varel's expression remained unchanged, but something in her posture shifted. "You were accused of treason," she stated. "The records do not specify the nature of your crime." "That's because there was no crime," Rain replied, the old anger resurfacing. "I refused an order to bombard civilian settlements on Altair Fu. The Alliance wanted to make an example of rebel sympathizers. I wouldn't be their executioner." Disobeying orders is treason in most military structures. Following immoral orders is a greater treason, to oneself. Rain's eyes hardened. "They stripped me of my rank, but I broke that badge myself, in front of the entire council." Varel studied him with those unnerving violet eyes. "The Zarketh do not permit such individual interpretation of duty." "Is that why you're here? Duty?" "I am here because I was commanded to be here," she answered simply. "And if you were not commanded, for the first time?" Varel seemed to consider a question carefully before answering. "I have never been uncommanded," Rain laughed, a sound without humor. "Welcome to the club. I've spent 5 years uncommanded. It's both the heaviest burden and the greatest freedom." "Freedom." Varel repeated the word as if testing its flavor. "The concept is abstract to me. I was designed to serve, not to choose." "Everyone can choose," Rain said, turning back to the viewport. "Even if the only choice is how to die." The rest of the day passed in a different kind of silence, less hostile, more contemplative. Rain caught Varel watching him with an expression that might have been confusion on a more emotive face. That night, he found her in the gymnasium, moving through combat forms with lethal precision. Her body flowed from one deadly position to the next, a dance choreographed for killing. Rain watched from the doorway, recognizing the martial discipline of the Zarketh elite, moves he had only seen in battlefield recordings, usually followed by allied casualties. "Impressive," he said when she finished. Varel turned to him, not a drop of sweat on her brow despite the intensity of her exercise. "It is standard training. For an assassin, perhaps. For a weapon," she corrected. "I was not raised as other Zarketh. I was cultivated." "Cultivated," Rain repeated. "Like a crop. Like a resource," Varel said. "Valuable but expendable when necessary." Rain moved into the gymnasium, stripping off his outer shirt to reveal a torso mapped with scars, some surgical, others clearly from combat. "We have that in common. Then—" Varel's eyes tracked the patterns of scar tissue across his body. "You were modified, repaired, enhanced, optimized for combat environments." Rain took a fighting stance. "Care to test your cultivation against mine?" Something like interest flickered in Varel's eyes. "You wish to spar? One day before I may be required to kill you?" "Consider it research," Rain replied with a grim smile. "For both of us." What followed was unlike any combat training Rain had experienced. Varel moved with inhuman speed and precision, but Rain's experience and adaptability kept him from being quickly overwhelmed. They circled each other, struck, parried, and withdrew, a deadly ballet where neither combatant fully committed to destruction. After 20 minutes, both were breathing heavily. Rain had managed to land 2 solid strikes, Varel had positioned herself for at least 4 killing blows, but had pulled back each time. "You're holding back," Rain observed, wiping blood from a split lip. "As are you," Varel replied. "Curious behavior for two who may be enemies tomorrow." "Or allies," Rain suggested. Varel's expression closed immediately. "I serve the Empire. And if the Empire is wrong?" "The Empire cannot be wrong," she said. But Rain caught the slightest hesitation in her voice. "It is absolute." "Nothing is absolute," Rain countered. "Not even duty." Varel turned away, her posture suddenly rigid. "I require rest." Without another word, she left the gymnasium, leaving Rain alone with his thoughts and the lingering sensation of having touched something within her that perhaps no one else had ever reached. On the morning of the 3rd day, the day of decision, Rain woke to find Varel standing at the main viewport, her silhouette stark against the backdrop of stars. For a moment, he simply observed her. There was something different in her posture, attention, or perhaps uncertainty. That hadn't been present before. "Have you decided?" he asked, moving to stand beside her. Varel did not look at him. "I dreamed last night. Is that unusual?" "I do not dream," she said. "War genes are conditioned against it. Dreams reduce combat readiness." Rain studied her profile, noting the faint crease between her brows. "What did you dream about?" "Stars," she answered. "Broken ones, and hands trying to repair them." She finally turned to face him. "What does it mean?" "I'm not qualified to interpret dreams," Rain said, "especially for someone engineered not to have them." Varel's violet eyes seemed less empty today, filled instead with something like confusion. "You have disrupted my conditioning. By being stubborn? By being—" She hesitated, searching for a word. "Whole." Despite being broken, Rain's hand moved unconsciously to the star badge on his chest. "We're all broken in some way. The difference is whether we let others define us by our cracks, or whether we define ourselves by what remains intact. And what remains intact in you, Captain Solace?" "My conscience," he answered without hesitation. "They took my rank, my reputation, my future, but not my ability to know right from wrong." "And what remains intact in me?" The question was so quiet, Rain almost didn't hear it. Before he could answer, the station's alarm system blared to life. Lyray's holographic form materialized beside them, her usual blue hue now pulsing red with urgency. "Captain, 3 vessels approaching. Alliance military designation." Rain moved quickly to the control console. "Show me." The viewport shifted to a tactical display, showing 3 heavily armed cruisers on an intercept course with the station. "They're hailing us," Lyray reported. "Put them through." The stern face of Consul Varnex appeared on the screen, a high-ranking member of the Alliance Council, whom Rain had dealt with during his court-martial. "Captain Solace." Varnex's voice dripped with false cordiality. "And Agent Varel Ka. How convenient to find you both together." "What do you want, Varnex?" Rain demanded. "To deliver a message. You have been charged with a second act of treason against the Alliance, the corruption and subversion of a diplomatic asset of the Zarketh Empire." Rain glanced at Varel, whose face had gone completely expressionless. "What nonsense is this?" "Agent Ka was sent to offer marriage or execution," Varnex continued. "Our intelligence suggests you have instead poisoned her mind against her duties. The Zarketh Empire is most displeased with this interference." "I've done nothing." "Your execution has been authorized, Captain Solace, as has the retrieval and reconditioning of Agent Ka." Varnex's smile was cold. "Consider it the end of your long defiance." The transmission cut off abruptly. Lyray's holographic form flickered anxiously. "Captain, They're charging weapon systems. Rain turned to Varel, whose violet eyes were now hard with focus. Is this part of your mission? A trap? No, she said, her voice tight. This is unexpected. They're going to kill us both, Rain said, moving quickly toward the station's emergency systems. You because you've been compromised, and me because I've outlived my usefulness as a political scapegoat. The Zarketh would not abandon an asset, Varel said, but uncertainty colored her voice. I am valuable. You're expendable, Rain corrected grimly. We both are. Pawns that have moved beyond our assigned squares. The station shuddered as the first volley of weapons fire struck its outer defenses. Shields at 60%, Liray reported. They are targeting life support and escape systems. Rain's mind raced. The observation station had minimal defensive capabilities and only one small transport vessel, designed for routine maintenance runs, not combat evasion. Varel, he said, turning to the assassin, you have three choices. Try to kill me as ordered, let them kill us both, or run with me. Varel stood perfectly still, her face a mask of conflict, perhaps the first real emotion he had seen from her. Where would we run to? The galaxy would hunt us both. Not the entire galaxy, Rain said, pulling up a star chart on the nearest console. Just the parts that benefit from keeping people like us in chains. Another impact rocked the station. Shields at 40%, Liray warned. Varel moved to Rain's side, studying the star chart. You have a plan. I have a desperate idea, he corrected. Which is more than they expect from us. Varel's eyes met his, and for the first time, Rain saw something other than emptiness or confusion in them, a spark of what might have been determination. Then, we should exceed their expectations, she said. Before Rain could respond, she moved with blinding speed, her hand darting toward his chest. He flinched, expecting an attack, but instead felt her fingers close around the broken star badge. What are you doing? He demanded. Varel held the badge in her palm, examining it. Then, with deliberate slowness, she drew a concealed blade from her sleeve and sliced a precise cut across her own palm. Blood, darker blue than her skin, welled from the wound. In Zarketh tradition, she said, pressing the broken badge into her bleeding palm, a warrior chooses their loyalty by blood. She lifted her hand, the badge now stained with her blood, forming a pattern that seemed to bridge the broken pieces of the star. If you will not forget your past, then I will not forget you. Rain stared at the blood-marked badge, momentarily speechless. The station shuddered again. Shields at 20%, Liray announced. Critical failure imminent. Then let's not be here when they fail, Rain said, snapping back to action. Liray, initiate Protocol Stardust. Protocol Stardust confirmed, the AI responded. Station self-destruct sequence initiated. Transport vessel prepped for launch. Rain turned to Varel. Last chance to change your mind. Varel handed the blood-marked badge back to him. I have made my choice. The first real choice of my existence. Rain accepted the badge, feeling its weight, both physical and symbolic, in his palm. Then let's disappoint the galaxy together. They raced through the corridors of the dying station toward the small hangar bay where the transport vessel waited. Behind them, systems began to overload, creating a cascade of explosions designed to destroy all evidence of the station's research and inhabitants. As they reached the transport, another blast rocked the station, sending debris crashing down around them. Rain dove forward, narrowly avoiding being crushed. But a sharp cry from behind made him turn. Varel was pinned beneath a fallen support beam, her face a mask of cold calculation rather than pain as she assessed her situation. Go, she said, meeting his eyes. The mission parameters have changed, but the outcome remains logical. One survivor is better than none. Rain didn't hesitate. He moved to her side, bracing himself against the beam. I didn't spend 5 years in exile just to start following stupid orders now. With a grunt of effort, he lifted the beam enough for Varel to pull herself free. Her leg was clearly injured. A deep gash, revealing circuitry integrated with muscle tissue, further evidence of her engineered nature. You risked capture for me, she said, as he helped her into the transport. Illogical. Welcome to humanity, Rain replied, sealing the transport's hatch and rushing to the controls. We specialize in the illogical. The small vessel roared to life, its systems primitive compared to the military craft outside, but adequate for their needs. Rain's hands flew over the controls, plotting a course even as Liray's voice echoed through the station's final announcement. Self-destruct in 10 seconds. 9, 8. The transport shot from the hangar bay like a bullet, accelerating hard enough to push them both back into their seats. Behind them, the observation station erupted in a carefully controlled series of explosions, a fiery diversion that would hopefully buy them precious time. They're pursuing, Varel observed, looking at the tactical display. Expected, Rain said, pushing the transport's engines beyond their recommended limits. But they're looking for a transport trying to reach a safe port. We're not going anywhere safe. He adjusted their course toward a dense asteroid field, a dangerous route for any vessel, but potentially suicidal for their small, lightly shielded transport. You intend to use the asteroids as cover, Varel said, understanding dawning in her voice. And as a weapon, Rain confirmed. Those Alliance cruisers are powerful but not agile. In that field, size becomes a disadvantage. As they approached the asteroid field, Rain glanced at Varel. She was examining her injured leg with clinical detachment, blue blood seeping through her fingers as she applied pressure to the wound. There's a medical kit under your seat, he said, focusing back on the controls. The damage is manageable, she replied. My systems will adapt. Forgive me if I don't leave your well-being to Zarketh Engineering, Rain said. We're in this together now. Something like surprise flickered across Varel's face before she reached for the medical kit. As she treated her wound, Rain guided their vessel into the asteroid field, immediately executing a series of tight maneuvers between the massive space rocks. Behind them, the Alliance cruisers slowed, their commanders clearly hesitant to follow into such dangerous territory. But their caution was short-lived. 2 of the cruisers held position at the edge of the field, while the third, smaller and more maneuverable, began to pursue. They're adapting, Varel noted, her wound now sealed with a medical compound that glowed faintly against her blue skin. So will we, Rain replied, his eyes scanning the tactical display for an advantage. How's your shooting? Optimized for both precision and lethality. Perfect. Rain nodded toward the weapons console. This transport has a single pulse cannon. Not much against a cruiser's shields. But in here, we don't need to destroy them. Just make them flinch at the wrong moment. Understanding immediately, Varel moved to the weapon station, her hands familiarizing themselves with the controls. Despite her injury, she moved with the same fluid precision Rain had observed in the gymnasium. Target approaching, she reported. Firing solution calculated. The transport bucked as Rain swung it around a particularly large asteroid, using the rock's gravity to increase their speed. The pursuing cruiser adjusted course, its superior engines allowing it to gain ground. Wait, Rain commanded, his eyes fixed on a cluster of asteroids ahead. Wait, now, Varel fired. The pulse cannon's beam lanced out, not at the cruiser directly, but at a small asteroid in its path. The impact fractured the rock, sending fragments spinning into the cruiser's path. The larger vessel attempted to evade, but caught the edge of the debris field. Its shields flared brilliantly before failing on one side, leaving it vulnerable. Again, Rain ordered, bringing their transport around for another pass. This time, Varel targeted the cruiser's exposed flank. The pulse cannon's beam struck directly, causing secondary explosions along the larger vessel's hull. The cruiser listed to one side, emergency systems flaring as it attempted to stabilize. "It's disabled, not destroyed," Varel observed. "We're not them," Rain said firmly. "We don't kill when we don't have to." He guided their transport deeper into the asteroid field, eventually emerging on the far side, away from the waiting Alliance vessels. Setting a course for open space, he engaged the engine's emergency thrust capability, knowing it would burn out quickly, but give them the head start they needed. As the stars stretched into lines around them, Rain finally allowed himself a moment to breathe. He turned to find Varel, watching him with an unreadable expression. "What?" he asked. "You spared them," she said. "Even though they tried to kill you. Even though they would not have shown you the same mercy." "Mercy isn't about what others deserve," Rain replied. "It's about what you're willing to become." Varel's violet eyes seemed to soften slightly. "The Zarketh have no word for mercy. The closest translation would be tactical restraint, the decision to preserve an asset for future use." "Is that how you see those cruiser crews? As assets?" "I am attempting to see them as you do," Varel admitted. "As people with value beyond their utility." She looked down at her injured leg, now sealed but still clearly damaged. "It is not a perspective I was designed to adopt. Yet here you are, trying anyway," Rain said. He reached into his pocket and withdrew the broken star badge, still marked with her blood. "That's what this really means. You know, not blind loyalty to a system or an empire, but the willingness to try something new, even when it hurts." Varel extended her hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Rain placed the badge in her palm. She studied it, turning it over to examine the dried blood that now formed a pattern across the broken surface. "In Zarketh tradition," she said slowly, "blood freely given creates a bond that transcends duty." She looked up at him. "I did not fully understand what I was doing when I marked this badge. I only knew that I did not want to be what they made me anymore." "Welcome to freedom," Rain said with a grim smile. "It's terrifying, isn't it?" "Yes," Varel agreed, surprising him with her candor. "But also exhilarating." The transport's navigation system beeped, indicating they had reached a safe distance for a hyperspace jump. Rain turned back to the controls. "Where to?" Varel asked. Rain entered coordinates into the navigation system. "Somewhere they won't look for us immediately. An old battleground where I lost friends and found enemies. A place that might hold answers to why they're so determined to eliminate us now." The hyperdrive engaged, and the stars outside the viewport blurred into the familiar blue tunnel of faster-than-light travel. As the transport settled into its journey, Rain became acutely aware of how small the cabin was, and how close Varel sat beside him, her presence both dangerous and somehow comforting. "You should rest," he said, noting the faint lines of strain around her eyes, the only indication that her injury caused her pain. "We have 12 hours before we reach our destination." "War genes require minimal rest," she replied automatically, then paused. After a moment, she added, "But perhaps I will try sleeping. Perhaps I will dream again." Rain nodded, sensing that for Varel, this simple human act represented a profound rebellion against everything she had been designed to be. As she moved to the small sleeping compartment at the rear of the transport, he called after her. "Varel!" She turned, her white hair catching the blue light of hyperspace, making it seem as though stars were tangled in its strands. "What remains intact in you?" he said, answering her earlier question. "Is your capacity to choose." They engineered your body, your skills, even tried to program your mind, but they couldn't eliminate your ability to question. That's what makes you more than a weapon. For the first time since her arrival at the observation station, something like a genuine expression crossed Varel's face. Not quite a smile, but a softening, a momentary glimpse of the person beneath the conditioning. "Rest well, Captain," she said. "Rain," he corrected. "Just Rain now. Titles belong to the past we're running from." Varel nodded once. "Rain," she repeated, as if testing the sound of his name without its military designation. Then she disappeared into the sleeping compartment, leaving him alone with the stars and the blood-marked badge that now seemed to hold the weight of both their futures in its broken form. The Helios Drift was a graveyard of ships, a vast debris field that had once been the site of a decisive battle in the war between the Alliance and the Confederation. Now, it served as a haven for scavengers, smugglers, and those seeking to disappear from official records. Rain guided their transport through the field with practiced caution, navigating between the hulks of destroyed battlecruisers and the skeletal remains of carrier vessels. Beside him, Varel watched the grim tableau with unblinking focus. "You fought here," she stated, rather than asked. "Third Fleet, 7th Division," Rain confirmed. "The Alliance claimed it as a victory. Was it not?" 20,000 dead on both sides," Rain said, his voice tight. "Entire crews vaporized in seconds. I wouldn't call that victory." They approached a particularly massive wreck, the remains of what had once been an Alliance flagship. Its broken hull still bore the insignia of the Council, now scarred by weapons fire and the cold vacuum of space. "The Indomitable," Rain explained. "Command vessel for the Alliance forces, officially listed as destroyed with all hands lost." "Yet you seek it specifically," Varel observed. "Why?" "Because not all hands were lost," Rain said, guiding their transport toward a barely visible docking port on the underside of the derelict vessel. "And because the Indomitable carried something the Council never wanted found, the true record of what happened here, and why the peace treaties were really signed." The transport systems registered an unexpected energy signature, emanating from the supposedly dead ship. Rain frowned, checking the readings twice. "Someone's home," he muttered. "A trap?" Varel asked, her body tensing in preparation for combat despite her injury. "Possibly," Rain admitted, "but also our only lead." He looked at her. "We can find another way if you—" "I will follow you," Varel interrupted, her violet eyes steady. "My choice, remember." Rain nodded, a strange warmth spreading through his chest at her words. He guided the transport to dock with the derelict vessel, the magnetic clamps engaging with a dull thud that resonated through their small craft. "Atmosphere present but thin," he reported, checking the environmental sensors. "We'll need breathers, but not full suits." They equipped themselves with the transport's emergency gear, oxygen masks and thermal layers to protect against the frigid temperature of the powered-down vessel. Rain also strapped on a sidearm, offering a similar weapon to Varel. She declined with a slight shake of her head. "I am the weapon," she said simply. "Right," Rain said, remembering her lethal efficiency in the gymnasium. "Stay close. This ship was home to 5,000 crew members when it went down. Most bodies were never recovered." They entered the derelict through the airlock, the transport system struggling to equalize pressure with the failing environmental systems of the larger vessel. Once inside, their lights cut through darkness so absolute it seemed solid, revealing a corridor distorted by battle damage and explosive decompression. "The bridge would be 17 levels up," Rain said, his voice slightly muffled by the breather mask. "But we need the data core, 3 levels down, central section." They moved through the ship like ghosts, their lights casting long shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. Varel walked with predatory alertness, her eyes constantly scanning for threats, despite the apparent emptiness of the vessel. As they descended, signs of the ship's violent end became more pronounced. Blast marks scarred the walls, and occasionally they passed compartments exposed to space, their contents frozen in the vacuum, including, in one case, the bodies of crew members who had been caught in the decompression. Rain paused at this sight, his light illuminating the faces of the dead, preserved by the cold of space, their expressions still locked in their final moments of terror. "You knew them," Varel observed. "Some," Rain acknowledged. This was Lieutenant Commander Alara's section. She had 3 children waiting for her on Proxima Colony. "You remember their names," Varel said, a note of surprise in her voice. "After all this time." "Someone should," Rain replied, moving on. "The official records list them only as casualties, numbers, not people." They continued downward, using emergency ladders where the turbolifts had failed. As they approached the data core level, Rain's instincts, honed by years of combat, began to signal danger. "We're not alone," he whispered, motioning for Varel to stop. She nodded, having sensed it too. A disturbance in the airflow, perhaps, or a sound too faint for conscious recognition. With silent communication, born of their brief but intense training session, they split up, approaching the data core chamber from different angles. The massive room housing the ship's central data core was partially illuminated, confirming Rain's suspicion that someone had restored power to select systems. The core itself rose like a monolith in the center of the chamber, its surfaces blinking with faint lights that indicated it was in standby mode rather than completely offline. And standing before it, her back to the entrance, was a figure Rain recognized immediately, despite the years that had passed. "Admiral Lavina," he said, stepping into the chamber with his weapon raised. "I thought you died with your ship." The woman turned slowly, her once regal uniform now a patchwork of repairs and adaptations for survival in the derelict vessel. Her face, once commanding and imperious, had grown gaunt, but her eyes still held the sharp intelligence that had made her one of the Alliance's most formidable leaders. "Captain Solace," she replied, her voice raspy from disuse or perhaps injury. "You're the last person I expected to see in this graveyard, especially in the company of—" Her eyes shifted to where Varel had emerged from the shadows. "A Zarketh Wargene. How interesting." "You know what she is," Rain said, not lowering his weapon. "Just like you knew what was really happening on Altair 4. Lavina's thin lips curved in what might have been a smile. "Always the perceptive one. It's why they feared you." She gestured to the data core behind her. "And why I preserved this, even when they ordered me to destroy it with the ship." "You deliberately scuttled the Indomitable," Rain realized, "and faked your own death." "A necessary sacrifice," Lavina said. "The alternative was becoming like Varnex, a puppet executing atrocities in the name of peace." "What atrocities?" Varel asked, moving closer, her body tense with alertness despite her apparent curiosity. Lavina studied Varel with clinical interest. "The Zarketh Empire's finest creation? Asking questions? Times have indeed changed." She turned back to the data core, pressing a sequence of commands into its interface. "See for yourselves." The core hummed to life, projecting a holographic display that filled the center of the chamber. It showed a series of diplomatic meetings, recorded from surveillance systems, council members, imperial representatives, and military leaders gathered around tables laden with star charts and treaty documents. "The peace treaties," Rain said, recognizing several of the sessions from historical records. "The facade," Lavina corrected. "Watch." The display shifted to more private meetings, smaller groups, often just 2 or 3 individuals speaking in hushed tones. Consul Varnex featured prominently, as did representatives from the Zarketh Empire and other major powers. The real negotiations happened here, Lavina explained. Not peace through mutual understanding, but peace through mutual blackmail. Each empire, republic, and federation holding hostages against the other's good behavior. The marriage alliances, Rain breathed, understanding dawning. They weren't symbolic, they were insurance. Precisely, Lavina nodded. And more than that, each bride or groom carried embedded surveillance technology, willingly or not. Some knew they were spies. Others were implanted without their knowledge. Varel stepped closer to the projection, her violet eyes reflecting the light of the damning evidence. The Zarketh participated in this? The Zarketh proposed it, Lavina said bluntly. Their bioengineering capabilities made them ideal partners in the scheme. They could create diplomatic assets with surveillance systems integrated at the cellular level. Varel's face remained impassive, but Rain saw her hands clench into fists at her sides. And I am such an asset. You're far more than that, Lavina said, studying Varel with renewed interest. You're their masterpiece, not just surveillance, but enforcement. A failsafe should any of the arranged marriages prove resistant to control. The holographic display shifted again, showing technical schematics that Rain recognized as bioengineering designs, Zarketh technology applied to human physiology. What am I seeing? He asked, though he feared he already knew. The future they planned, Lavina said grimly. Hybridization programs, using Zarketh wargene technology to create a new generation of diplomatic assets, children born into perfect obedience, with loyalty literally encoded in their DNA. Rain felt sick. That's why they wanted me to accept a marriage alliance. You were the perfect candidate, Lavina confirmed. A war hero with exceptional genetic markers from the military enhancement programs. Your children would have been extraordinary assets. And when I refused, you became an obstacle to their grand design, one that needed to be eliminated, but carefully. A martyr might inspire resistance. So they tried to disgrace me first, Rain said, the pieces finally fitting together. The treason charge, the exile, the repeated marriage offers, all to break me or control me. And when that failed, Lavina continued, they sent their most lethal asset to eliminate you, but made it appear to be your choice. A final refusal with fatal consequences. Varel had gone completely still, her face a mask of cold fury. I was sent to kill him if he refused me, creating the illusion that he chose his fate. And then I would be... What? Reconditioned? Repurposed? Discarded, most likely, Lavina said bluntly. Once you had eliminated the obstacle, your knowledge of the operation would make you a liability. Rain looked at Varel, seeing the betrayal written in the rigid line of her shoulders, the deadly stillness of her posture. They would have killed you too. After using me to kill you, Varel said, her voice so cold it seemed to lower the temperature in the already frigid chamber. A perfect solution to their problem. But now, you've created a new problem for them, Lavina observed, something like approval in her tone. 2 rogue assets with knowledge of their conspiracy. Which is why they're hunting us, Rain concluded. But this evidence, he gestured to the data core, could expose the entire system. It could, Lavina agreed, if you could broadcast it widely enough that they couldn't suppress it. But the Council controls all major communication networks, and the Zarketh Empire has agents embedded throughout independent channels. Then, we need to take it to the heart of the system, Rain said, a desperate plan forming in his mind. To the Council chamber itself, where every diplomatic representative will see the truth simultaneously. Lavina laughed, a harsh sound in the quiet chamber. Ambitious. Suicidal. But ambitious. Not necessarily, Varel said, her voice thoughtful. The Galactic Concord is in 3 days. All major powers will have representatives present, including the Council and the Zarketh Imperial House. Rain stared at her. You know this how? I was briefed on all major diplomatic events before my mission, Varel explained. Standard protocol for assets operating in politically sensitive contexts. The Concord is held in the Arcturus Nexus, Lavina said, considering the idea. Heavily guarded, but with multiple access points due to the number of delegations. We would need credentials, disguises, and a way to access the central broadcasting system, Rain said, thinking aloud. And a way to survive afterward, Lavina added dryly. Varel's violet eyes met Rain's. One problem at a time. First, we need this data. Rain nodded, turning to Lavina. Can you transfer the core's contents to a portable device? The Admiral hesitated, then reached into her tattered uniform, withdrawing a small, metallic cylinder. I've been waiting 5 years for someone worthy of this burden. It contains everything. The meetings, the breeding programs, the surveillance networks, and the list of every diplomatic asset currently placed throughout the galaxy. She held out the cylinder, but pulled it back slightly when Rain reached for it. Be certain, Captain, once you possess this, there's no going back. They will hunt you to the ends of the galaxy. They're already hunting us, Rain said. At least now we'll know why we're dying, Lavina nodded, a grim satisfaction in her eyes as she placed the cylinder in his hand. Then, I've fulfilled my duty. The rest is up to you. Come with us, Rain offered. Your testimony would add weight to the evidence. Lavina shook her head, gesturing to her body. I wouldn't survive the journey. Radiation poisoning from the reactor breach. I've lasted this long through sheer stubbornness and some creative applications of medical technology. But my time is measured in days now, not years. Rain understood then why she looked so gaunt, why her voice rasped. She had sacrificed everything, her ship, her career, her health, to preserve the truth. I'll make sure they know, he promised. About you, about the Indomitable, about all of it. Just make sure they can't do it again, Lavina replied. That's monument enough. A sudden alarm blared through the chamber, and Lavina moved quickly to a console. Proximity alert. 3 vessels entering the drift. Alliance signatures. Varnex, Rain guessed. They must have tracked our transport. You need to go, Lavina said, her fingers flying over the controls. I can create a diversion. Wake up some of the Indomitable's defensive systems. They're limited, but might buy you time. Admiral, Rain began, but she cut him off. That's an order, Captain, she said, a ghost of her former authority in her voice. Complete the mission. Expose the truth. Rain straightened involuntarily, military discipline reasserting itself in the face of her command. He gave her a crisp salute, the first he had offered to anyone in 5 years. It has been an honor, Admiral. Lavina returned the salute, then turned back to her console. Now go, and take your Zarketh warrior with you. She looks like she has scores to settle. Rain glanced at Varel, who stood with lethal readiness, her violet eyes burning with a newfound purpose. Together, they left the data core chamber, moving swiftly back through the derelict vessel toward their docked transport. Behind them, the Indomitable began to awaken, long dormant weapon systems powering up, creating a light show that would be visible throughout the drift, a final act of defiance from a ghost ship and its dying commander. As they reached their transport and disengaged from the derelict, Rain caught a glimpse of Alliance vessels moving through the debris field, their attention drawn to the suddenly active Indomitable. It was the distraction they needed, allowing them to slip away on minimal power, using the massive debris field as cover. Once clear of the immediate danger, Rain set a course away from known space lanes, pushing the transport's engines to their limits once more. Beside him, Varel sat in silence, her eyes fixed on the stars ahead. "Are you all right?" he asked finally. "I was created to serve the Empire," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "Every cell in my body was designed for that purpose. Yet they would have discarded me the moment my usefulness ended." "That's what happens when people are treated as assets instead of beings," Rain said quietly. "It's what I refused to accept 5 years ago, and what they tried to kill me for refusing now." Varel turned to him, her expression thoughtful. "You knew, didn't you? Not the details, perhaps, but you sensed the wrongness in the system." "I saw the aftermath," Rain replied. "Diplomatic marriages that produced children who were whisked away for special education. Officers who questioned orders and disappeared. The pattern was there, if you were willing to see it." "And now we have proof," Varel said, her eyes falling to the data cylinder he had placed in the transport's secure compartment. "But how do we use it when the entire galaxy will be hunting us?" Rain engaged the hyperdrive, setting a course for a small, unregistered outpost where they might find supplies and information without immediately being detected. "We need allies," he said. "People who have reason to distrust both the Alliance and the Empire." "Outcasts," Varel suggested. "Like us." "Exactly like us," Rain agreed. "And I know just where to start looking." As the transport accelerated into hyperspace, Rain found himself studying Varel's profile, the proud line of her jaw, the determination in her violet eyes. She had been engineered to be the perfect weapon. Yet here she sat, choosing her own path despite everything programmed into her DNA. "What?" she asked, catching his gaze. Rain shook his head slightly. "I was just thinking that for all their advanced technology and genetic engineering, they made one critical mistake with you." "And what was that?" "They gave you a mind capable of questioning," he said. "And once you start questioning, freedom is inevitable." Something like a smile touched Varel's lips, brief but genuine. "Perhaps that is why they sent me to kill you. They feared you would awaken such questions." "Is that what I've done?" Rain asked. Varel looked down at her palm, where a faint scar remained from when she had cut herself to mark the broken star badge. "You have done something far more dangerous," she said quietly. "You have made me wonder what I might become if I were truly free." The question hung between them as the transport hurtled through hyperspace, carrying them toward an uncertain future and a desperate plan that might save the galaxy, or end their lives in the attempt. The mining colony of Perdition's Edge existed in the shadow of legal space, a ramshackle settlement built into the side of an asteroid, rich in rare minerals. It was a haven for those who had reason to avoid official scrutiny: deserters, fugitives, and those who had simply fallen through the cracks of civilized society. Rain guided their transport to a docking bay on the colony's outer ring, careful to use the false identification codes he had programmed into the vessel's transponder. Beside him, Varel had changed from her Zarketh uniform into nondescript clothing they had found in the transport's emergency supplies, an attempt to disguise her distinctive appearance. "Your hair and skin will still mark you as Zarketh," Rain observed as they prepared to disembark. Varel pulled a hood over her white hair. "I am not the first Zarketh to seek refuge among outcasts," she said. "My people's genetic engineering programs produce many disappointments. Those deemed inadequate often flee rather than face termination." The casual way she mentioned this, the disposal of living beings for failing to meet specifications, reminded Rain of how deeply conditioned she had been, and how remarkable her current rebellion truly was. "Stay close," he said as they left the transport. "This place operates on its own rules." The docking bay opened onto a sprawling marketplace, where vendors hawked everything from stolen technology to contraband food supplies. The air was thick with the mingled scents of exotic cooking, machine oil, and too many beings crowded into too small a space. Conversations in a dozen languages created a constant background hum, providing perfect cover for two fugitives seeking to blend in. Rain led the way through the crowded pathways, his eyes constantly scanning for threats or opportunities. Virel moved beside him, her body language subtly altered to appear less military, less lethal, though Rain knew she could switch back to her trained precision in an instant if needed. They made their way to a cantina called the Broken Orbit, an establishment known for its discretion and its clientele of former military personnel. Inside, the lighting was dim and the music loud enough to discourage eavesdropping without preventing conversation. Rain found them a booth in a corner with a good view of both the entrance and the back exit. A server droid approached, its optical sensors flickering as it scanned them briefly. "Refreshments?" it inquired in a mechanically pleasant voice. "Information," Rain countered, sliding a credit chip across the table. "About someone who might still be operating here. Goes by Cipher." The droid's processors whirred audibly as it considered the request. "Cipher does not advertise their location," it finally replied. "Cipher finds those deemed worthy of finding." "Tell Cipher that Captain Solace is looking," Rain said, sliding another credit chip across the table. "And that I have something worth their time." The droid collected both chips. "Refreshments while you wait?" "Two of whatever won't kill us," Rain said, settling back in the booth. The droid rolled away, disappearing into the crowd. Virel leaned forward slightly. "Who is Cipher?" "Former Alliance intelligence," Rain explained quietly. "The best data specialist I ever worked with. Officially died during a covert operation on the Zarketh border." "But actually defected," Virel guessed. "Disappeared," Rain corrected. "Even I don't know if they're still alive. But if anyone can help us access the Arcturus Nexus security systems, it's Cipher." The droid returned with 2 glasses of amber liquid. "Your refreshments," it announced. "And a message. The captain is presumed dead. Proof of identity required." Rain nodded, having expected this. He reached into his pocket and withdrew the broken star badge, now stained with Virel's blood. He placed it on the table, letting the droid's sensors capture its image. "Tell Cipher, even broken stars still burn," he said. The droid departed once more. Virel eyed the drinks suspiciously, but followed Rain's lead when he took a cautious sip of his. "It's just synthetic alcohol," he assured her. "Tastes terrible, but won't poison us." "You trust this Cipher person?" Virel asked, setting her barely touched drink aside. "Trust is a strong word for anyone in this place," Rain replied. "But Cipher owes me. I helped them disappear when the Alliance wanted them eliminated for knowing too much." "About the marriage alliances?" "About something else entirely," Rain said. "But it connects. Everything in this galaxy seems to connect back to who controls whom." They fell silent as a hooded figure approached their table, small in stature, but moving with a confidence that suggested danger nonetheless. Without asking permission, the figure slid into the booth beside Virel, who tensed imperceptibly. "Dead men shouldn't visit bars," a voice said from within the hood, deliberately modulated to be unidentifiable as either male or female. "It upsets the living." "Good thing I'm not dead." "Then," Rain replied. "Though not for lack of trying on the Alliance's part." The hood tilted slightly, revealing nothing but shadows. "And you've brought a Zarketh wargene with you. How fascinating." A gloved hand emerged to pick up the broken star badge, turning it to examine the bloodstain. "Even more fascinating. A blood oath. How primitive and sentimental." "We need your help, Cipher," Rain said. Cutting to the chase. Access codes, security protocols, and identities that will get us into the Galactic Concord at the Arcturus Nexus. A sound like a mechanical chuckle emerged from the hood. Is that all? Perhaps you'd like me to gift wrap the High Council for you as well? We have the data core from the Indomitable, Rain said, keeping his voice low. Admiral Lavina preserved it. It contains everything, the real purpose behind the diplomatic marriages, the surveillance network, the breeding programs. The hooded figure went completely still. Lavina lives? Barely, Rain answered. Radiation poisoning. She's using the last of her strength to keep the Indomitable systems running as a diversion. And she gave you the core, Cypher said, a note of genuine surprise in the modulated voice. She must truly be desperate, or truly believe in you. We need to broadcast this data during the Concord, Rain pressed. Every diplomatic representative needs to see it simultaneously, before the Council or the Empire can shut it down. Cypher was silent for a long moment, the gloved fingers still toying with the broken badge. Finally, the hood tilted up, and though Rain still couldn't see the face within, he felt the weight of Cypher's evaluation. The Concord begins tomorrow, Cypher said eventually. Security will be unprecedented. The broadcast systems are isolated, accessible only from the central chamber. Can it be done? Varel asked, speaking for the first time. Cypher's hood turned toward her. A Zarketh who asks questions instead of following orders. How extraordinary. The modulated voice held a note of genuine curiosity. What did the captain do to inspire such deviation from your programming? He treated me as a being, not an asset, Varel replied simply. Another mechanical chuckle from within the hood. How very like him. Cypher turned back to Rain. It can be done, but not by you two alone. You'll need a team, specifically, my team. You have a team? Rain asked, surprised. I have resources, Cypher corrected. People who, like me, found the Alliance's methods problematic. We've been gathering evidence for years, but nothing as comprehensive as what you claim to have. Then you'll help us? Rain pressed. For a price, Cypher said, setting the broken badge back on the table. I want a copy of the data core, and I want my team extracted safely after the broadcast. No heroic last stands or suicide missions. Agreed, Rain said without hesitation. But we move now. The Alliance is already hunting us, and they'll have agents at the Concord looking for us specifically. Then, we'll need to change who you are. Cypher stood, gesturing for them to follow. Come. My workshop isn't far, and we have much to do if you're to become diplomatic representatives by tomorrow. They followed Cypher through a maze of back corridors and maintenance tunnels, eventually arriving at a nondescript door that looked like every other in the colony's residential section. Inside, however, was a technological wonder, a compact but comprehensive workshop filled with advanced communications equipment, fabrication tools, and several workstations displaying data feeds from throughout the galaxy. Welcome to my humble operation, Cypher said, finally pulling back the hood to reveal a face covered entirely by a featureless metallic mask. Don't look so surprised, Captain. Did you think I'd show my true face even to you? Prudence isn't surprising, Rain replied. Survival often depends on it. Indeed. Cypher moved to a console and began typing rapidly. Now, let's see what we have to work with. The data core, please. Rain hesitated, then withdrew the cylinder Lavina had given him. This doesn't leave my sight. Of course, Cypher agreed, indicating a port on the main console. You may connect it yourself. As Rain inserted the cylinder into the designated port, the screens around the workshop came alive with data, meeting recordings, technical specifications, and personnel files scrolling past faster than the eye could follow. Cypher made a sound of appreciation. Lavina was thorough, they said. This is everything. Absolutely everything. The entire conspiracy laid bare. Varel moved closer to one of the screens, her violet eyes tracking the information with intense focus. There, she said suddenly, pointing to a file labeled Project Genesis. That contains the Zarketh breeding program specifications. Cypher brought the file to the main screen, revealing detailed genetic engineering protocols and implementation strategies. They've been planning this for generations, Cypher said, voice tight with controlled anger. Creating a new ruling class with built-in loyalty and surveillance capabilities. And I was to be the prototype for the next phase, Varel said, her voice flat as she read the specifications for her own creation. The first of a new line of enforcers, outwardly diplomatic but internally weaponized. Rain moved to her side, not touching her, but offering his presence as support. Which makes your choice to rebel all the more significant, he said quietly. You've proven their entire theory of genetic determinism wrong. Varel looked at him, something vulnerable briefly visible in her violet eyes, before her trained composure reasserted itself. Perhaps, she said. Or perhaps my rebellion was simply an unexpected mutation. Either way, Cypher interrupted. You two have the potential to bring down the entire system, if, they emphasized the word. We can get you into the Concord and access the broadcast network. Cypher moved to another workstation, pulling up schematics of the Arcturus Nexus. The Concord will be held in the Grand Chamber. All major powers will have representatives present, including several members of the Council, and at least one Imperial delegate from the Zarketh. Varnex will be there, Rain said with certainty. He wouldn't miss a chance to further the conspiracy. And the Zarketh delegate will likely be High Commander Soren, Varel added. My creator, Cypher nodded. Which means both of you would be recognized immediately in your current forms. They studied Rain and Varel thoughtfully. We'll need to do more than change your identities. We'll need to change your species. Is that possible? Rain asked skeptically. With current technology? Quite, Cypher assured him, moving to a cabinet and withdrawing several devices. Subdermal pigmentation modulators, skeletal ridge prosthetics, ocular lenses. We can make you appear to be representatives from the Outer Rim Confederacy. They're sending a new delegation this year, and their biometric data isn't fully integrated into Alliance security systems yet. Over the next several hours, Cypher and two assistants who arrived silently and worked without introduction transformed Rain and Varel. The process was uncomfortable but effective. Rain's skin tone was altered to a deep bronze, with subtle ridge patterns applied to his forehead and along his jawline. His hair was darkened and textured differently, and ocular implants changed his eye color to a luminous gold. Varel's transformation was even more dramatic. Her distinctive blue skin was modulated to a silvery gray. Her white hair darkened to black with iridescent highlights. Carefully applied prosthetics altered the shape of her cheekbones and brow, while her violet eyes became a deep emerald green. When they stood before a holographic mirror, neither recognized themselves. Cypher circled them, making final adjustments to their appearances. Convincing, they declared finally. You are now Diplomat Torin Val and Security Attaché Kira Nix of the Outer Rim Confederacy. Your credentials have been encoded into the Nexus security systems, and your biometric signatures have been adjusted to match your new appearances. Rain examined his transformed reflection, impressed despite his discomfort with the alien face that looked back at him. How long will these alterations last? The pigmentation will hold for approximately 72 hours before beginning to fade, Cypher explained. The prosthetics are semi-permanent. They'll need to be professionally removed. The ocular implants can be deactivated with this. They handed Rain a small device. 1 press for each implant. Varel was still studying her reflection, her expression unreadable. The Zarketh have enhanced perception, she said. Soren might see through this disguise. Not if you maintain your distance, sci-fi advised. The molecular restructuring of your pheromone signature should mask your Zarketh essence from casual detection. Just don't let him touch you, or spend too much time in close proximity. And the broadcast? Rain asked, turning from the mirror. How do we access the system? Cypher moved to another workstation, bringing up the schematics for the Grand Chamber's communication array. The primary broadcast node is located here, behind the council seating area. It's guarded, of course, but not heavily. Most of the security is electronic rather than physical. They held up a small, innocuous-looking device. This will bypass the security protocols long enough for you to connect the data core. Once connected, my team will remotely initiate the broadcast. Every screen in the chamber, and by extension, throughout the diplomatic networks, will display the contents of the core. And then all hell breaks loose, Rain concluded grimly. Indeed, Cypher agreed. Which is why extraction is critical. Once the broadcast begins, you'll have approximately 3 minutes before security locks down the entire nexus. You need to be here. They indicated a service corridor on the schematic, where my team will be waiting with transport. If we make it that far, Varel observed. When, Rain corrected firmly. When we make it that far. Cypher studied them both. Your optimism is either inspirational or delusional. Captain, I haven't decided which. Call it determination, Rain said. We've come too far to fail now. Then take these, Cypher said, handing them each a small communication device designed to look like a standard diplomatic translator. They'll allow you to stay in contact with each other and with my team. The frequency is encrypted and should be undetectable to standard security scans. As they prepared to leave, Cypher pulled Rain aside. A word of caution, Captain. Your Zarketh companion? Varel, Rain interrupted. Her name is Varel. Varel, Cypher acknowledged. She's fighting against her own genetic programming. The Zarketh designed their war genes with loyalty safeguards, biochemical triggers that can cause extreme pain, or even death if they attempt to betray their creators. Rain glanced at Varel, who was examining the diplomatic credentials Cypher had provided. She's already defied them by not killing me. That could be interpreted as mission adaptation rather than outright betrayal, Cypher explained. But directly confronting her creator, especially with evidence that exposes the Empire's crimes, may trigger those safeguards. Be prepared. Is there a way to neutralize these triggers? Rain asked, concern evident in his voice. Not without extensive genetic reprogramming, Cypher replied. For now, just be aware that her rebellion comes at a potentially lethal cost to her. The question is whether she considers that cost worth paying. Rain nodded grimly. Thank you for the warning. They rejoined Varel, who looked up at their approach. Is everything prepared? As much as it can be, Cypher replied. A transport is waiting to take you to the Arcturus Nexus. It's registered to the Outer Rim Confederacy Diplomatic Corps and has all the necessary clearances. And your team? Rain asked. Already in position, Cypher assured him. They'll be monitoring your progress and will be ready for both the broadcast and the extraction. As they prepared to leave, Cypher held out a hand to Rain. The broken star, they said. You can't take it with you, it's too identifiable. Rain hesitated, his hand moving protectively to the pocket where he'd stored the badge. It had been his constant companion for 5 years, a reminder of both his failure and his principles. I'll keep it safe, Cypher promised. You can reclaim it when this is over, if you survive. After a moment's hesitation, Rain withdrew the badge and placed it in Cypher's gloved hand. The bloodstain, Varel's blood, had dried to a dark blue pattern that seemed to bridge the broken pieces of the star. "Be careful with it," he said. "It's more than just metal now." Cypher tilted their masked head curiously. "You've changed, Captain. The man I knew 5 years ago wouldn't have attached such sentiment to a symbol of his past." "The man you knew 5 years ago was still defining himself by what he'd lost," Rain replied. "I'm starting to define myself by what I might help create instead." "A dangerous evolution," Cypher observed. "Hope makes people take risks." "Freedom is worth the risk," Rain said, glancing at Varel, who was watching their exchange with those now emerald eyes. "For everyone," Cypher nodded once, then stepped back. "Good luck, Captain, or should I say, Diplomat Vol. The galaxy's future may well depend on what you do in the next 24 hours. "No pressure," Rain said with a grim smile, adjusting the unfamiliar diplomatic attire Cypher had provided. He turned to Varel. "Ready? Attaché Nix?" Varel inclined her head slightly, already adopting the more formal posture of her cover identity. "The mission parameters are clear. I am prepared." As they departed Cypher's workshop and made their way to the waiting transport, Rain felt the weight of the missing badge, a strange emptiness, where it had rested against his chest for so long. But in its place was something new, a sense of purpose that went beyond personal vindication or even justice. This was about freedom, not just for himself or for Varel, but for an entire galaxy trapped in a system built on control and exploitation. If they failed, that system would continue, perhaps for generations. If they succeeded, well, that was a future he could barely imagine, but it was one worth fighting for, worth dying for, if necessary. The transport lifted off from Perdition's edge, carrying them toward the heart of the very powers that had tried to control or destroy them both. The Arcturus Nexus hung in space like a jewel, a massive station constructed of gleaming metal and crystalline viewports, designed to showcase the pinnacle of galactic architecture and engineering. As their diplomatic transport approached, Rain, now Diplomat Torin Vol, watched the endless stream of vessels arriving for the galactic concord. "Impressive," he murmured, partly to maintain their cover in case of surveillance. Beside him, Varel, now Security Attaché Kira Nix, nodded slightly. "The Nexus was constructed 300 years ago as a neutral meeting ground for all major powers," she said, her voice subtly altered to match her new identity. "Its position at the conjunction of 7 major hyperspace lanes makes it both symbolically and practically significant." "You know your history," Rain commented. "All Zarketh assets are required to memorize strategic information about potential targets," Varel replied quietly, then caught herself. "Though I suppose that knowledge serves a different purpose now." Their transport joined the queue for docking clearance, their credentials transmitted automatically by the vessel's systems. Rain tensed as they approached the security checkpoint, but the alterations Cypher had made to their identities held firm. Their transport was directed to a docking bay reserved for mid-tier diplomatic delegations, not prestigious enough to draw attention, but not so insignificant as to be dismissed. As they disembarked, Rain was struck by the controlled chaos of the Nexus during the Concord. Diplomats from hundreds of worlds moved through the vast reception areas, their diverse appearances, languages, and customs creating a tapestry of galactic civilization. Security drones hovered overhead, their sensors constantly scanning for threats, while uniformed personnel from various factions maintained a careful watch over their respective delegations. "Stay close," Rain murmured to Varel as they joined the flow of diplomats moving toward the central registration area. "And remember, we're minor representatives. We don't draw attention." Varel inclined her head slightly in acknowledgement, her posture and movements perfectly mimicking the formal but reserved demeanor of an Outer Rim security attaché. Rain marveled at her adaptability, the ease with which she had assumed this new identity suggested a lifetime of similar transformations. They approached the registration terminals, where automated systems verified credentials and issued access passes for the various chambers and functions of the Concorde. Rain held his breath as the scanner passed over his altered features, but the system beeped its approval, issuing him a credentials badge that glowed with embedded security markers. "Welcome, Diplomat Vol," the automated system intoned. "Your delegation is assigned to Sector 17, Level 4. The opening session begins in 3 hours." Varel's verification proceeded similarly, without incident, and they moved away from the registration area, blending into the crowd of diplomats, making their way deeper into the Nexus. 3 hours, Rain noted quietly. "We should familiarize ourselves with the layout." "Agreed," Varel replied. The schematic cipher provided was accurate but limited. "We need to verify access points and security positions." They made their way through the public areas of the Nexus, ostensibly admiring the architecture and art installations that had been contributed by various member worlds over the centuries. In reality, they were mapping guard rotations, identifying surveillance blind spots, and confirming the location of the broadcast node they would need to access. As they rounded a corner into a less crowded corridor, Rain felt Varel suddenly tense beside him. Following her gaze, he saw a tall, imposing Zarketh male in elaborate ceremonial armor, surrounded by a retinue of advisors and guards. The Zarketh's skin was a deeper blue than Varel's natural color, marked with more elaborate patterns that signified his high rank. "Soren," Varel whispered, her voice almost inaudible. "High Commander of the Zarketh Elite Corps." "Your creator," Rain remembered. He noticed a subtle tremor in Varel's hand, a barely perceptible sign of distress from someone trained to show no weakness. "We should avoid him," but it was too late. Soren's head turned in their direction, his cold gaze sweeping over the corridor's occupants with predatory assessment. For a heart-stopping moment, his eyes lingered on Varel, a slight frown creasing his brow, as if something about her triggered a subconscious recognition. Then, mercifully, an Alliance official approached Soren's group, diverting his attention. Rain gently guided Varel toward a side passage, putting distance between them and the Zarketh delegation. "Did he recognize you?" Rain asked, once they were safely away. Varel shook her head, but her usually perfect composure was disturbed. "I don't think so, but he sensed something. The Zarketh elite are engineered with heightened perceptive abilities." "We'll need to be careful," Rain said. "Avoid him completely if possible." "There's something else," Varel said, her voice tighter than usual. "When I saw him, I felt pain. Here." She pressed a hand to her temple. A warning, perhaps, from the loyalty safeguard cipher mentioned. Rain's concern deepened. "Can you continue?" Varel's emerald eyes, so different from her natural violet, hardened with determination. "Of course. This discomfort is insignificant compared to the conditioning I've already overcome." But Rain noticed she was still rubbing her temple, an unconscious gesture that betrayed the lingering pain. He made a mental note to keep her as far from Soren as possible during their mission, not just to avoid detection, but to protect her from her own genetically encoded loyalty triggers. They continued their reconnaissance, eventually making their way to the Grand Chamber, where the Concorde's main sessions would be held. Even empty. The space was impressive, a vast amphitheater with tiered seating arranged around a central speaking platform. Above, a transparent dome revealed the stars beyond the Nexus, a constant reminder of the vastness of the galaxy these diplomats presumed to govern. "The broadcast node is there," Varel indicated discreetly, nodding toward a technical station positioned behind the Council's elevated seating area. 2 guards, as Cipher indicated, but also a technician. "We'll need a distraction," Rain mused. "Something significant enough to draw attention, but not serious enough to trigger a security lockdown. The opening ceremony includes a procession of all major delegations, Varel suggested. The technician will be focused on maintaining broadcast quality, and the guard's attention will be on the crowd. That may be our best opportunity, Rain nodded in agreement. Then we'll move during the procession. Cypher's team should be in position by then. They retreated from the grand chamber, continuing their circuit of the Nexus to avoid appearing too focused on any one area. As they moved through a diplomatic reception hall, Rain spotted a familiar face that made his blood run cold. Consul Varnex, engaged in conversation with several Alliance officials. Unlike Soren, who had merely glanced in their direction, Varnex was methodically studying each diplomat who entered the hall, his sharp eyes missing nothing. Rain turned casually away, guiding Varel toward a display of cultural artifacts that allowed them to keep their backs to the consul. "Varnex is here," he murmured. "And he's looking for us." "He cannot recognize us in these disguises," Varel said, though her tone lacked absolute certainty. "He's suspicious by nature," Rain replied. "And he knows we survived the attack at the observation station. He'll be expecting us to make a move." "Then we should give him one," Varel suggested. "A false trail to follow while we execute the actual plan." Rahane considered this. Cypher might be able to help with that. A security alert in another section of the Nexus. Perhaps. They moved away from the reception hall, finding a quiet alcove where they could activate the communication devices Cypher had provided. "Cypher, this is Vol," Rain said quietly, using his cover identity. "We need a diversion. Varnex is actively searching." "Acknowledged," came the modulated reply. "My team can trigger an environmental alarm in the southern quadrant during the opening procession. It should draw security attention without causing a full lockdown." "Perfect," Rain confirmed. "We'll move during that window." "Be advised," Cypher added. "Our analysis of the data core has revealed additional information. The Alliance has implemented a new neural signature scanner in the Grand Chamber, technology developed from Zarketh Research. It's designed to detect extreme emotional states as a security measure." "Meaning, we need to stay calm," Rain interpreted. "Precisely. Strong emotions, particularly fear, aggression, or intense determination, could trigger the system." Rain glanced at Varel, whose disciplined control over her emotions should make this less of a concern. "Understood. We'll proceed as planned." They ended the communication and made their way to the quarters assigned to their false delegation, a modest suite that provided them a secure place to prepare for the evening session. Once inside, with privacy screens activated, Rain removed the data cylinder from its hiding place in his diplomatic robes. "Everything comes down to this," he said, turning the cylinder in his hands. "Years of deception, thousands of lives manipulated or sacrificed, all exposed in a few minutes of broadcast." "If we succeed," Varel reminded him. "When we succeed," Rain corrected with a grim smile. "I'm choosing optimism." Varel studied him with those unfamiliar emerald eyes. "You truly believe we can change the course of galactic politics with this one act?" "I believe truth has power," Rain replied. "Maybe not enough to change everything immediately, but enough to start the process. People deserve to know when they're being manipulated, controlled, or sacrificed for someone else's agenda." "Even if that knowledge brings chaos?" Varel asked. A genuine question, rather than a challenge. "Even then," Rain confirmed. "Freedom always involves risk. It's why those in power fear it so much." Varel was silent for a moment, then said, "The Zarketh have no word for freedom in our primary language. The closest concept translates to dangerous choice." "An apt description," Rain acknowledged with a slight smile. "Though I prefer to think of it as necessary choice." As the time for the opening session approached, they prepared themselves, checking their disguises, ensuring the data cylinder was securely hidden yet accessible, and reviewing the schematics of the grand chamber one final time. The plan was simple in concept, but fraught with risk. Approach the broadcast node during the procession. Use Cypher's device to bypass security. Connect the data cylinder, and then reach the extraction point before the inevitable chaos erupted. "Ready?" Rain asked, as they prepared to leave their quarters. Varel met his gaze steadily. "I have made my choice," she said simply. "Let us see it through." They made their way to the grand chamber, joining the flow of diplomats entering for the opening ceremony. The vast space had transformed since their earlier visit, now filled with representatives from hundreds of worlds, the air humming with the mingled voices of a dozen translator systems. The central platform was illuminated with ceremonial lighting, while the council members, including Varnex, had taken their elevated positions overlooking the assembly. Rain and Varel found their assigned seats in the outer rim section, strategically positioned with a clear line to both the broadcast node and their planned exit route. As they settled in, Rain scanned the chamber, noting the positions of security personnel and the heavy presence of both Alliance and Zarketh guards near the council seating. The ceremony began with traditional formalities, welcomes in various languages, acknowledgments of historic treaties, and invocations of continued peace. Rain barely listened, his focus on the approaching moment when they would need to act. Beside him, Varel sat with perfect composure, though he noticed her gaze occasionally flicking toward where Soren sat among the Zarketh delegation. Finally, the procession of major powers began, each significant delegation rising in turn to be formally recognized, their emblems and achievements displayed on the massive screens that encircled the chamber. This was the moment they had been waiting for, when all eyes would be on the procession rather than on two minor diplomats from the outer rim. Rain's communication device vibrated subtly against his wrist. "Now," came Cypher's modulated voice. "Southern Quadrant diversion in 3, 2, 1. A distant alarm sounded, and several security personnel near the southern entrance immediately moved toward the disturbance. Simultaneously, the screens flickered momentarily, a minor technical glitch that would not seem suspicious, but would require the broadcast technician's attention. Rain and Varel rose casually, as if merely shifting for a better view of the procession. They moved along the back of their seating section, gradually making their way toward the technical area behind the council seating. The remaining guard at the broadcast node was focused on the procession, his attention further divided by the security alert from the southern quadrant. They approached from his blind side, Varel slightly ahead, her movements fluid and purposeful, like any security attaché performing a routine check during an important event. When the guard finally noticed her, she presented her credentials with such confident authority that he merely glanced at them before returning his attention to the chamber. Rain, following behind, activated Cypher's device, a small, innocuous object that emitted a targeted electromagnetic pulse designed to temporarily disrupt the security protocols around the broadcast node. The technician, already distracted by the earlier glitch, didn't notice the brief fluctuation in his systems. With practiced coordination, Rain and Varel positioned themselves at the node, while Varel engaged the technician with a question about the transmission quality to the outer rim sectors. Rain accessed the primary input port, swiftly connecting the data cylinder to the broadcast system. "Connection established," he murmured into his communication device. "Cypher, execute." "Initiating broadcast," came the immediate reply. 30 seconds to full transmission. Begin your extraction now." Rain nodded to Varel, who smoothly disengaged from her conversation with the technician. They turned to leave and found themselves face to face with Consul Varnex. "Unusual behavior for outer rim diplomats," Varnex said, his cold eyes studying their faces with predatory intensity. "Especially during the procession of honors." Rain forced himself to remain calm, remembering the neural signature scanners Cypher had warned them about. "A technical matter, Consul," he replied in the formal tones of his diplomatic cover. "Our sector has been experiencing transmission issues." Varnex's gaze shifted to Varel, lingering on her face with growing suspicion. "Your security attaché seems unusually concerned with broadcast quality. In my experience, such personnel focus on physical threats, not technical matters." Before either could respond, the first images from the data cylinder appeared on the massive screens around the chamber. Admiral Lavina's recorded evidence of the secret meetings between Alliance and Zarketh officials. The sound of thousands of conversations died as diplomats throughout the chamber turned to watch in stunned silence. Varnex's expression transformed from suspicion to cold fury as he recognized himself in the recordings, discussing the genetic optimization program with Zarketh scientists. He turned back to Rain and Varel, all pretense abandoned. "Solace," he hissed, reaching for the security alert on his wrist. Varel moved with the lightning speed of her Zarketh genetics, striking Varnex's hand away from the alert. "Too late," she said, her voice returning to its natural timbre. "The truth is already broadcasting throughout the Nexus, and beyond, to every diplomatic network in the galaxy." Around them, the Grand Chamber erupted into chaos as the evidence continued to play. Detailed specifications of the surveillance implants in diplomatic brides and grooms. Genetic engineering protocols for creating perfectly loyal hybrid children. And lists of those already placed in positions of influence throughout the galaxy. "Security breach," Varnex shouted, trying to be heard above the growing tumult. "Arrest them!" But the chamber was already in pandemonium. Diplomats from worlds that had been manipulated into the marriage alliances were confronting council members. Representatives from systems that had suspected, but never confirmed the conspiracy, were demanding immediate investigations. And those who had participated willingly in the scheme were desperately trying to distance themselves from the evidence being broadcast before their eyes. Rain grabbed Varel's arm. "Time to go," he urged, pulling her toward their planned escape route. They pushed through the chaos, using the confusion to mask their movements as they headed for the service corridor, where Cypher's team awaited. They had nearly reached the exit when a commanding voice cut through the noise. A voice, speaking in the distinctive harmonic tones of High Zarketh. "Varel Ka." Varel froze, her body suddenly rigid with pain. She turned, seemingly against her will, to face Soren, who stood at the edge of the Zarketh delegation, his cold eyes fixed on her with terrible recognition. "Protocol Omega," he said, his voice carrying despite the chaos around them. "Return to primary directive," Varel gasped, her hands flying to her temples as the loyalty safeguard Cypher had warned about activated in full force. Her knees buckled, and Rain caught her before she could fall. "Fight it," he urged, supporting her weight as they continued toward the exit. "He doesn't own you. He never did." Soren's voice followed them. "You are Zarketh property, Varel Ka. Your rebellion causes your pain. Surrender to your programming and it will cease." Varel's emerald eyes, the artificial lenses covering her natural violet, locked onto Rain's face. "Go," she managed through clenched teeth. "Complete the mission. I will. Delay him." "No," Rain said firmly, half dragging her toward the exit as security forces began to move through the crowd toward them. "We leave together, or not at all." With what appeared to be tremendous effort, Varel straightened, fighting through the genetically encoded pain that threatened to incapacitate her. "Then we go," she agreed, her voice tight but determined. "My choice. Always my choice." They reached the service corridor, slipping through just as the Nexus security systems began to initiate lockdown protocols. Cypher's team, 3 nondescript individuals whose faces were concealed by environmental masks, waited with a maintenance vehicle designed to transport technical personnel throughout the station's restricted areas. "Quickly," one of them urged, helping Rain get the struggling Varel into the vehicle. "Lockdown completes in 90 seconds. They sped through the service tunnels. The maintenance vehicles authorized codes, allowing them to pass through security checkpoints that were still in the process of activating emergency protocols. Behind them, the sound of pursuit grew, security forces coordinating to locate and apprehend the individuals responsible for the broadcast. "Extraction vessel is docked at maintenance port Theta 9, the driver informed them as they navigated the labyrinthine tunnels. "It's registered as a supply transport. Low priority during security events." Rain nodded, his attention focused on Varel, who was fighting a silent battle against her own genetically encoded loyalty triggers. Her face was contorted with pain, sweat beading on her brow as she resisted Soren's command to return to her primary directive. "Can you help her?" Rain asked one of Cypher's team, a woman whose environmental mask concealed all but her eyes, which held the clinical focus of someone with medical training. "Temporarily," she replied, preparing an injector from a medical kit. "This will suppress the neural pathways that the loyalty triggers are targeting. But it's not a permanent solution." She administered the injection at the base of Varel's skull. After a few moments, Varel's rigid posture relaxed slightly, though the pain remained evident in her eyes. "Thank you," she managed, her voice strained but clear. "Don't thank me yet," the medic replied grimly. "This buys you hours, not freedom. The Zarketh build their safeguards to be nearly impossible to permanently disable." The maintenance vehicle screeched to a halt at a nondescript loading dock where a small, rugged transport vessel waited, its exterior marked with supply company logos and shipping designations that would allow it to depart even during a security lockdown. "This is where we part ways," the leader of Cypher's team said as they hurriedly exited the vehicle. "The vessel is programmed with coordinates to a safe location. Cypher will contact you there." "Thank you," Rain said, helping Varel toward the waiting transport. "For everything." "Don't thank us either," the leader replied, something like grim humor in their voice. "What you've done today has thrown the galaxy into chaos. The old order is fracturing even as we speak. What comes next?" They shrugged. "That's the problem with freedom. No one can predict what people will do with it." Alarms blared throughout the docking area as the Nexus lockdown reached their sector. Rain and Varel boarded the transport, its engines already humming with pre-flight preparations. The hatch sealed behind them, and Rain moved to the pilot's seat, quickly familiarizing himself with the controls. "Can you co-pilot?" he asked Varel, who had collapsed into the navigation chair, still fighting the effects of the loyalty triggers despite the medic's injection. "Yes," she said with determination, forcing her trembling hands to move across the control panels. Disengaging docking clamps, preparing for immediate departure. The transport lifted away from the Nexus, just as security vessels began to mobilize. Its unremarkable appearance and valid supply credentials allowed them to join the stream of service vehicles being evacuated from the station as part of emergency protocols. By the time the authorities realized which vessel to target, they had already reached the outer security perimeter. "Preparing for hyperspace jump," Varel announced, her voice steadier, as the distance from Soren weakened the effect of his command. The stars stretched into lines as the transport leapt into hyperspace, carrying them away from the Arcturus Nexus and the chaos they had unleashed there. Only then did Rain allow himself to exhale the breath he felt he'd been holding since they first approached the broadcast node. "We did it," he said, still somewhat disbelieving. "The truth is out there now. All of it." Varel nodded, though her expression remained troubled. "And what happens next?" "I don't know," Rain admitted. "Revolution, maybe. Reorganization. Certainly. The Alliance and the Empire won't fall overnight. But their power is based on secrets and control. We've stripped away both. And us? Varel asked quietly. What happens to us next? Rain reached across the space between them, taking her hand in his. Her skin was cool to the touch, the alien gray of her disguise, unable to completely mask the natural blue tint beneath. That depends, he said, on what you want to happen next. For the first time, it's truly your choice. Varel looked down at their joined hands, then back up to meet his gaze. I want to be free, she said simply. Not just from the Empire or from Soren's commands, but from the very design of my creation. I want to know who I am when all the programming and conditioning are gone. Then that's what we'll work toward, Rain promised. Whatever it takes. The transport hurtled through hyperspace, carrying them toward an uncertain future in a galaxy that was even now beginning to transform. Behind them, the careful order maintained through manipulation and control for centuries was unraveling. Ahead lay the unknown, frightening, perhaps, but filled with possibilities that had been denied to countless beings for generations. Freedom was, as the Zarketh language suggested, a dangerous choice. But as Rain looked at Varel, still fighting against the very design of her DNA to claim her independence, he knew it was the only choice worth making. 3 months later, a small vessel approached a remote outpost on the edge of what had once been Alliance space. The galaxy was still in turmoil. The exposure of the Marriage Alliance conspiracy had triggered revolutions in a dozen systems, diplomatic realignments in scores more, and the collapse of the Council's centralized authority. The Zarketh Empire had withdrawn behind its borders, its internal power struggles hidden from outside view, but rumored to be vicious as different factions fought for control. Rain guided their ship toward the landing pad, where a single figure waited, their metallic mask gleaming in the light of the setting sun. Cypher, he greeted as they disembarked. You're looking exactly the same. A benefit of never showing one's face, Cypher replied, their modulated voice containing a note of amusement. Though I can't say the same for you two. The changes are remarkable. Beside Rain, Varel stepped forward, her appearance now entirely her own. After months of genetic therapy and the painstaking removal of control implants, she had emerged transformed. Her skin remained the pale blue of her Zarketh heritage, but the military markings had faded, replaced by patterns of her own choosing. Her white hair fell freely around her shoulders, no longer constrained in the severe style of an imperial asset. And her violet eyes, her natural eyes, no longer hidden behind artificial lenses, held a warmth and self-possession that would have been unthinkable in the assassin who had first arrived at Rain's observation station. The changes are more than skin deep, she said, her voice carrying the slight musical quality native to her species, but free of the formal cadence of her military conditioning. Though some continue to be challenging. The loyalty triggers? Cypher inquired. Mostly neutralized, Rain answered. The genetic specialists on Proxima 4 found a way to redirect the neural pathways. She still feels the echo of pain when thinking about direct defiance, but it no longer incapacitates her. Impressive, Cypher said. But then, you've both made something of a specialty of defying expectations. They led the way into a small, utilitarian building that served as both home and operations center for whatever network Cypher maintained. Inside, screens displayed news feeds from across the galaxy, reports of new governance systems emerging, diplomatic realignments forming, and the ongoing investigations into those who had participated in the conspiracy. The galaxy is remaking itself, Cypher observed, gesturing to the screens. Messily, as expected, but with surprising resilience. New alliances are forming, voluntary ones, this time. And the marriage practice? Varel asked. Largely abandoned, Cypher replied. though some traditions die hard. A few systems still arrange diplomatic unions, but with full disclosure and consent now required by the new Galactic Charter. And the Zarketh? Rain inquired. The question he knew Varel wanted to ask, but couldn't bring herself to voice. Cypher's masked head tilted slightly. Civil war, according to our sources. The exposure of the breeding programs turned much of their population against the military leadership. Soren was among the first casualties, apparently assassinated by his own elite guards. Varel showed no reaction to this news, though Rain felt her hand briefly squeeze his. "And the others like me?" she asked. "The war genes?" "Many have claimed asylum in neutral systems," Cypher said. "Others have formed their own communities in abandoned outposts. A few returned to Zarketh to join the reformist factions." They paused, studying Varel. "You're something of a legend among them. You know, the first to choose freedom." "I was not the first to want it," Varel corrected quietly. "Just the first with the opportunity to claim it." Cypher nodded, then turned to a cabinet behind their workstation. "I believe I have something that belongs to you, Captain." They withdrew a familiar object, the broken star badge, still marked with Varel's dried blood. Rain accepted it with a nod of thanks, turning it over in his hands. The badge felt lighter than he remembered, less burdened with the weight of betrayal and lost honor. "I've kept my end of our agreement," Cypher said. "The data core has been distributed to trusted sources throughout the galaxy. No single power can suppress the information now." "And your team?" Rain asked. "Scattered but safe," Cypher assured him, working toward their own versions of freedom. As they prepared to leave, Cypher asked the question Rain had been expecting since their arrival. "What will you do now? The galaxy is in flux. People with your skills and experiences could help shape what comes next." Rain glanced at Varel, who answered for them both. "We've done our part in tearing down the old order. Let others build the new one. We have our own rebuilding to do first." Outside, as they walked back to their vessel, Varel paused to look up at the stars, now representing possibility rather than confinement. "Where to next?" she asked. Rain followed her gaze upward. "There's a small planet in the Eridani system. Uninhabited, beautiful. Far enough from the centers of power to be left alone, but close enough to civilization for occasional contact." "A place to heal," Varel suggested. "To discover who we are when not defined by others." "Exactly," Rain agreed. "A place to start again." As they boarded their vessel, Rain took one last look at the broken star badge in his palm. With a moment's consideration, he handed it to Varel. "Would you like to do the honors?" he asked. Understanding immediately, Varel took the badge. From a compartment in her clothing, she withdrew a small tool and began to work with delicate precision. When she finished, she held up the result. The broken pieces of the star now fused together with a thin line of Zarketh armor metal, creating a whole star with a silver scar running through its center. "Not broken," she said, returning it to him. "Just transformed." Rain accepted the repaired badge, feeling its new weight and balance. Without hesitation, he pinned it to his chest, not as a symbol of his past service or lost honor, but as a reminder of what they had endured and overcome together. "Like us," he agreed. Their vessel lifted off from Cypher's outpost, rising toward the stars that had once seemed so distant and cold from Rain's isolated observation station. Now they beckoned with possibility, not just for the two of them, but for a galaxy awakening to the potential of true freedom. Varel set the coordinates for the Eridani system, her hands moving with the grace of someone who knew exactly what she was choosing. As the hyperdrive engaged, she turned to Rain with the hint of a smile that still felt new on her face. "The Zarketh have no word for home," she said. "The closest translation is place of duty." I think I would like to learn what a real home feels like. Rain reached across the space between them, taking her hand in his. Then that's what we'll build, he promised. Together. The stars stretched into streams of light as their vessel leapt into hyperspace, carrying them toward a future neither could have imagined when fate, or perhaps simply the machinations of those who thought they could control them, had first brought them together. Behind them lay a galaxy in transformation, ahead, a life of their own choosing. For a man who had rejected every bride the Empire sent him, and for a woman engineered to be the deadliest of them all. It was not the ending anyone had planned. It was better. It was theirs.